Architecture is a statement of culture. It speaks of who we have been, who we are, and who we want to be. An architect must be a witness of culture, a witness to culture. At the root of culture is our collective human existence. It resides in a need to aspire, to tell our personal and collective stories. It is natural. Through each decision, each moment of the making, each moment of the making of each brick, the architect builds our culture. Buildings stand for a long time. Yes, they can change us. They can inspire culture through change, but in the end, they remain a testament to the moment in time, a moment of cultural history. It is the architect's mission to read the tea leaves of our culture, to anticipate us, to lead us, to follow us, to inspire us, and to make our culture visible in architecture beyond generations. This is his job. To do that, the architect must be a student of culture, a youth at heart, an old sage in technique, a prophet in spirit, and a person. Humanism lies deep within us all. Todd Schliemann is a partner in any of the architects. He comes to us from New York City, is that correct? Todd has a very long portfolio. It's all on the web. I'm not going to go into all of that. He's a teacher, he's an architect, he's a principal, and we look forward to hearing from him. Would you welcome Todd Schliemann?
Thank you very much. It's a little embarrassing to hear those words read back to me because all I had to do was write them. Anyway, thank you for inviting me here. This is the first time I've been to Wyoming, let alone Sheridan. It is a beautiful place. I grew up sailing. I love the sea. But something about the sea and the mountains have something in common, and I'm not sure what it is. I've spent some time in the West doing a building in Salt Lake City, and it is an inspiring place. So what I thought I would do is try to explain this curious name that we named ourselves, Ennead. Ennead is an ancient Greek word that means a group. Now when I got to the office, it was called James Stewart Polshek, became James Stewart Polshek and Partners. And Jim was the Dean of Columbia at that time. We are now 175 people, but when I got there in 1979, I was the 7th employee, so it's changed quite a bit over time. About 10 years ago, Jim Polshek retired, and we carried on under his name, the Polshek Partnership. The rest of us as partners, there were 9 of us. We were basically on our own at that point and had been for quite a while. Jim was very gracious to give us opportunities to do things. In any case, at one point we realized that if we continued with his name and he disappeared, we would probably disappear also. So we thought, well, we're going to change the name and change the way we structure the firm, because with a sole proprietor, it's one person guiding it. And if that one person goes away, it's very difficult to provide continuity, not only for the first generation, but for generations to come. So what we did is we decided, the 9 of us said, all right, we're going to create equal partners to do away with the politics of any one individual saying I'm more important because I make more money or I have more awards or whatever. And we're going to work as a group. It's going to be a kind of team effort, and we wanted a name that would reflect that. And so, I have this little show I give where, a sole proprietor is like a hoof. It's a single element, very strong in identity. But the problem is, if that hoof gets hurt, the horse is going to fall down. We're a hand, which means all the digits are the partners. Each one has character, right? But when and each one has a separate identity, but when you put it together, it works as one, and it has its own identity. So that's how we try to operate. So far, we've been quite successful, but you know, we have a lot of mouths to feed. So if you have any work out there that you want to throw my way, in any case. So what I'd like to do is push the sort of meaning of nature a little bit. The sort of title of this is Architecture Intersects Science. So what I want to do is I want to say, or tell you a little bit about how we use science to inform the architecture and how the architecture can help communicate the science to people that aren't scientists, basically. So the question is, what is science? This is a display in the museum I did in Salt Lake City, Natural History Museum. These are stegosauruses hung on the wall. Scientists generally like to categorize things, to understand processes in the natural world, and so they use these ologies, we call them, all kinds of geology, biology, and so they create these categories, which to the layman may seem a little cryptic and boring, frankly. To the scientists, they're tremendously fascinating. So this is actually called the cladistic diagram. What does that mean? Well, it's basically a family tree, except it extends over millions of years, which doesn't really show, you know, what the offspring are, but what's related to what, and when it comes out at the bottom, where does it go? So that's a sort of a way scientists look at science, and it's not easily communicated. God, I'm worse than Jim. So this is the Willamette meteorite. It's 15 tons of iron that was found in Willamette, Oregon, and it was found by a farmer who used to plow around it. The corrugations you see are from rust because it was half in the ground and half out. And in the 20s, I guess, he decided, I want to get this out of my field, so he communicated with someone who got in touch with the museum, and they went out and brought it in. The Native Americans actually used this. They thought it was a sacred object, which it's now in the Rose Center for Earth and Space in New York City. It had previously been in the old planetarium that was torn down to make way for the new one. But what this is it's an artifact. It's an item that gets studied in many ways. You know, its materiality, its history, its carbon dating. So it's kind of an object where science is all around it, but for us, it's just an object. Beautiful, but it's just an object. So the stories that are behind it maybe aren't as powerful as just the object itself. So then you have situations where there aren't any things in science, there's just information, ideas. And this is an exhibit at the New York Hall of Science, which is basically hands-on exhibitry, sort of a discussion of a bunch of different ideas which gets delivered through exhibit design. So science then is interpreted by exhibit designers. And those exhibit designers will often create sort of situations where things are sort of in what they may have been like at certain points. So here we have a glass floor. The bones you see were the way they were found. This is in Salt Lake City. So you can actually walk and see how they lay when the scientists discover it, which makes it a little more accessible to us. The scientists just look at the bones and go, let's look at that bone. You can walk in there and say, wow, this is actually how they do it. So the exhibit designer actually starts to create this kind of environmental situation and turns it into a kind of personal human experience as opposed to this kind of empirical scientific experience. And also there's the landscape, the sort of science of the natural world extending out into the landscape, and the kind of exhibit potential and architectural potential you have to begin to use the landscape, which, since we're people, and we do respond to the natural world in a way which is very profound. It's not head, it's heart. The idea that you can actually integrate that into the exhibitry and the architecture is some of what I want to talk about. So this is the Rose Center for Earth and Space in Manhattan. What we did here is, right from the beginning, we thought, well, we need to create a high-impact planetarium. So we started to look at precedents, Boulet's cenotaph to Newton, the big sphere. So we said, well, what if we did put a big 90-foot sphere in this box? What could we do with it? I mean, yeah, it's a powerful image for people. It's a draw. It's very platonic. But what can we do with it in terms of trying to communicate the information we want to describe? So what we did is we said, well, we'll use it as a scaling device. So basically, you can't see it, but it's 90 feet of sphere. These are all the planets and their relative sizes to the 90-foot sphere, which would be the size of the sun. So that's Mercury. That's Earth with the moon. I think that's Uranus. That's probably Mars. But what it does is, and then you actually can go the other way. That's just for the planets. Like there's if the big 90-foot sphere was a red blood cell, in scale, this would be a human virus, my fist. So you go the other way. So all of a sudden, the kind of power of the architectural move, which was the big sphere, is an assist to communicate the science in a way that we can understand it without being a scientist. And then the hands-on exhibitry, that all of a sudden, these are telescopes, but they're kind of interpreted a little bit differently. And then there's the space itself. Now, you know, in a cathedral, you know, these beautiful cathedrals, these tall spaces with all this beautiful natural light and the kind of resounding acoustics, they touch us in a way which activates our sort of human awareness of ourselves and our environment and our memory, very much so, our memory. You know, like you're in a cathedral and all of a sudden you feel the power of the space and you're just ready to receive information, God in this case. So that's the sort of idea that we've done over and over again in these buildings. We want to move people to create memory so that when they use their head, their brain to understand things, they take away with them an experience which helps them to retain that information, but also potentially helps them to understand it better. This space, the Rose Center, it's a little higher than Grand Central Station, and it's filled with stuff. And it does communicate to the outside, which is another thing that museums really try to do more of these days, which is to try to reach out to the public, because science museums are fairly apolitical. They don't really need to take a political stance because they're kind of analyzing things objectively. So usually museums of natural science and science museums are in and of themselves apolitical, democratic, if you will. So here's Boulet's tribute to, forgive me, Boulet's cenotaph to Newton. But what you can see here is, those are people. So he imagined this massive thing, which is really quite empty, but it was there to create a sense of remembering an individual through space and form. So here's our version of it. The American Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. So this isn't nature as you know it. This is nature as I know it. All of that's landscape, at least for me in this case. So the museum is about, the existing museum is about 2 million square feet. Sits right astride Central Park. And in it is about 7 million items. They call them items, which is the collections. And they don't have any off-site storage. They store it all on this campus. And it's run just like a university. There's a faculty, tenured faculty. They teach graduate students. There's an administration. And then there's exhibition, which is like the performance. So, let's see. We opened that in 2000. Before that, what stood on the site was a planetarium, the Hayden Planetarium, which was a fairly modest affair. It had been built in the 20s. And the whole complex was a New York City landmark, which is a legally designated term, which means you can't mess with it. Well, we tore the planetarium down. I don't know how we got away with it, but we kind of basically said, we'll do something better than that. The other thing that was a characteristic about this museum was it was a lot of masonry buildings, closed, very closed. And you have to go through this small little door to get into it. And then you'd find all these riches, which was the sort of philosophy of the time. And the planetarium was the same thing. There was this door into dark space so that you could see the stars and see the lights that are out there in the universe. So we had this idea that what we wanted to do was create contrast with these vaults for dead things, these masonry things. So the big idea was, well, we'll make it all glass, let the light in, because we don't have any things that the light will damage. We have information and architecture where we can communicate the ideas, the interpretive ideas, to the visitors. So we turned it into a big glass box and put a big sphere in there and a bunch of other stuff. Now, there's a terrace with a parking garage underneath, buses drop off. We made a new connector, renovated the power building, which we'll get into later, and there's a new entrance, and then a number of other things. So the contrast of the glass and openness to the masonry actually makes the masonry kind of feel a little stronger. In any case, that was the big idea behind it. The transparency, we sort of extended. It's water white glass, so it creates these beautiful, soft reflections. But it reflects the buildings that are across the street on 81st, which are beautiful, old, fairly historic structures. So you start to actually engage the neighborhood through the reflectivity of the glass, day and night. Now, in order to achieve the transparency that we were looking for, since that was the key word here, to try to communicate the science of astronomy and astrophysics, we wanted to make sure the glass was very clear, that there were very few obstructions to being able to see through it. So the wall is actually, I think it's 97% transparent, which includes mullions, any support structure, etc. And the way we achieved that was to hang it with wires and then reinforce it, the wind bracing, with basically sticks and wires, tension, and compression members. So it's a pin-supported glass. It's hung on a 5/8" steel rod every 10 feet. The trusses, the white vertical trusses that actually hold the roof up, when they put them up, just doing this in the wind, they were just very rubbery, because they're not really structured until we tensioned the membrane around the outside. And then once we did that, it stiffened it. And just an anecdote, when Matt Levy was the structural engineer, he was with Weidlinger, and he, when he first designed the wall, I said, Matt, how much is this going to move when the wind blows? He goes, well, 2 feet out and 2 feet in. I said, Matt, you're gonna terrify people. He said, yeah, but it'll work that way. It'll be really cool. I said, no, it won't be very cool. People are gonna go crazy. So what it actually does is it moves 4 inches, but you can't see it. But the transparency became a kind of very important aspect as to how we designed the glass box. Like, there is no corner column. Oops. There is no corner column because we wanted to be able to see through it. If you put a corner column there, it becomes like a table. Also, no corner column, nor is there a sort of obstruction at the top. Because if we had put this big top on it, it would have felt like a table with glass hanging off of it, as opposed to being a complete volume of glass. So that's basically a skylight that slopes back into the roof. So the interior, as I said, is filled with all kinds of interesting things. The ramp was, again, an architectural idea to communicate sort of subliminally this idea of astronomy and astrophysics. It's a kind of, it's a swirling form that you see again and again in some of the star formations and movements of galaxies. So it's a long ramp which comes out of the bottom of the sphere. There's a show in the bottom of the sphere called the Big Bang, which is the beginning of the universe. You come out and you walk down the ramp to the end, and then you can go back in and see some other exhibits in the museum. But it's a 13 billion year trip from the beginning of the universe to today. And along the way, there are plaques that tell stories about the formation of this and that, the Earth, and the atmosphere, and the age of the dinosaurs way down at the end. And then at the very end, there's a little human hair that's displayed, which is us, which is the time of the 13 billion years that's represented by that scale. And it's us from the beginning of us, which is prehistoric, to today. And then the various other things that are in there, we spent a long time trying to integrate them so that they didn't seem like, a lot of museums are just basically dark warehouses that you plop exhibits in, and you light them so that you feel like you're you have no constraints, no architectural constraints. Well, we had a lot of natural light, so we needed to make sure that all the exhibitry was part of the architecture. So we worked very closely with the exhibit designer, who was Ralph Applebaum, creating this kind of contextual object-like abstraction which began to describe ideas, things, and you're there everywhere on the floor, in the ceiling, on the walls. There's just all kinds of information. And also it becomes it's a social event also. It's interesting, we have all these computers that we look at all the time, but what's really interesting is that people still like to be with other people. Look here, look at this group. I mean, you could be watching me on TV probably, right? But we want to be with each other. So the idea that it becomes a social space and gets used that way beyond just visiting the museum with crowds of kids. People get married in here. They have Friday night, they bring in jazz bands. They serve drinks. They give lectures. They announce the latest great find in the universe to the news here. And they actually show films. So what it becomes is it becomes a sort of town hall almost, as more than a social space, but a very public one. And that's what architecture can do to sort of help out and go even beyond the science, but reach out to the people at large. So we also went a little bit further. We infiltrated the museum. We did a master plan for the whole museum, and then this is the Hall of Ocean Life, which was an existing space which had a big whale in it. They redid the whale because the original whale was modeled on a dead one, so it's a little puffy. So this one's a little more accurate. But what we did here is we restored the room, and the skylight had been, during World War II, had been tarred over. So we took off the tar, but then we discovered that the glass had deteriorated, so we had to cover it back up again. So what we did is we created a sort of light box, which is the ocean looking up through the ceiling. So we tried to adapt the original architecture to create an environment to understand, or to make it feel like you were with the whale swimming in the sea. And on the right is the whole of biodiversity, which is one of every ology that's in the museum is plastered on this wall. And it's really just a beautiful thing, but it gives you a sense of the variety and the interconnectivity of everything that's in the natural world, and it's really quite impressive. We did a number of other things. Now, that would be the interpretive side of this museum. This is the empirical side, which is where the scientists work and where they store things and study them and sort of write the story of the natural world. This is the Star Pavilion, which we tucked into a little courtyard. And inside is our scientists' labs, imaging equipment, some storage. There's a temporary exhibit hall, a gift shop, and a series of scientists' offices. But their collections are extraordinary. Now, these are all real things, okay? A lot of natural history museums will replicate the real bones because they're afraid that they'll deteriorate and they want to keep them hidden. The Museum of Natural History doesn't do that. They put the real bones out on display. So we had to have a very flexible and accessible system to sort of retrieve them and display them. So that was the sort of basis. You have this kind of interpretive side and this empirical side to try to, each one looks at the idea of science differently. So as an architect, we try to bring meaning to our buildings with metaphor, sometimes context, as Jim said, which we do quite often. So in this case, science is the thing that begins to influence the architecture in a way to bring, or it is the context, actually. So this is the New York Hall of Science. It's in Flushing Meadows, Corona, Queens, New York City. And we were asked to create quite a bit more exhibit space, some learning labs, some offices, new loading docks, etc., to attach to an existing building. So the park that is there now was the site of the 1964 World's Fair. And believe it or not, I actually went there when I was 9 years old. It was a lot of fun. Robert Moses built it out. It was fun. It was a time. It was a very different time. It was a time of looking towards the future. Science actually became a very, very important sort of driving force in the United States and across the world. So there was a lot of emphasis on science. So this is the Science Pavilion, which was designed by Wallace K. Harrison. And it was basically meant to remain after the park was closed and a lot of the other pavilions were torn down. It's a cellular concrete structure, basically just poured in place concrete. And those are individual little glass panels, which I'll show you a little later on. You basically walked up a ramp. There was a reflecting pool, and you entered into this sort of ripply folded structure.